basically trying to ensure that there is no repeat of 9/11, and we're fortunate enough that we haven't had a repeat of that. Right or wrong, good or bad, for all the things we've done, all the places we've been deployed to, and all the rhetoric and all the criticism about all the deployments that have occurred, there still hasn't been a repeat of 9/11, and whether that's a result of all deployments or it's just chance, whatever it is, in my mind, we were doing the right thing, not necessarily doing the right thing all the time and not necessarily getting it right, but our heart was in the right place, and our intent was right, and our beliefs and our purpose was honourable.
My name's Ryan, and for the last 7 years I've been making surfing tutorials on YouTube to help people learn how to surf and improve their surfing. But the most important lesson I've learned over this period is that surfing doesn't just have the power to improve the quality of our lives, but it also has the power to save our lives. So I've travelled to Perth in Western Australia to catch up with one of my mates who's a Special Forces veteran, having served in both the Special Air Service Regiment and the Commando Regiment in Australia. He's also a passionate surfer, and I know that surfing played a critical role in his recovery post-service. His story doesn't only give hope to veterans, but it also gives hope to anyone out there who's battling with mental illness.
My name's Nick Caldwell. I'm the Managing Director and co-founder of the Mill Gym. I did 12 years in the military. I joined in 1996, so it was a fair while ago now. And I basically joined the Army because I wanted to go into Special Forces. So from about the age of 10, I'd made a decision that that's the route I wanted to take, and that's what I wanted to do. And I knew also that that was a career that would take me to do some pretty exciting things, and it was also a continuation of the life that I'd lived up to that stage. But I was very fortunate whilst I was at university and I was a reservist, I had the opportunity to do commando selection. So I basically took a bit of unscheduled leave from university, undertook the commando selection course, and was fortunate enough to pass that and be selected. And from then on, I just decided that's the way I wanted to go. So I gave up university, signed on full time, and started my commando training. The commandos was great. Like, it was basically at that point in my life, a boy's wonderland. You know, it was everything that I'd imagined that commandos or special forces would be like. And I was surrounded by a bunch of guys that absolutely met my expectation in terms of what stoic warriors or guys who have that understanding of what it takes to work that hard and be that capable and try to mentor people below them and lead by example, all those sorts of things. And I just saw that as such a great thing and a great environment. So I knew at that point that that's the career I wanted to take and that's what I wanted to do. So in my view, and in the view of a lot of my cohort in my recon platoon at the time, the SAS was the place to go. So it had in the back of my mind that whilst I was doing all this commando work, I still wanted to go and attempt selection for Special Air Service, knowing also that the commandos was a great place to work, surrounded by good guys, still some of my best mates to this day. And I knew it would be just a matter of time before they became a mature unit that would be the force of choice, depending on what the need was for the Australian government. And that's obviously proved itself now. Like, the commandos are definitely effectively a battle-hardened, highly experienced, highly capable unit, and they have their own unique set of niche skills which are complementary to the SAS and sometimes in some areas different. But still, my focus was to do SA selection and attempt SAS and start a career in the SAS. So we, as a cohort, my patrol and I, we just trained together. So when we came back from Timor, our goal was to get onto the next selection course, and our hierarchy at the time were very supportive of that. A lot of our hierarchy were ex-SAS officers and commanders. So they gave us the space and the room to train, and we just trained. And by the time we got to selection, I think I was the fittest, fastest, smartest I've ever been. And I at least at that point in time, I had this feeling that if I wasn't selected now, I'm not sure how much I could give. But that was the way I thought, because I always had in the back of my mind that I could go back to the commandos. But at the same time, I gave myself no choice. Like, I kept saying to myself, there is no choice. It's only SAS or nothing. Like, I've got to pass this. There's no other way for me. I think that was one of the key drivers and one of the enablers that enabled me to persevere through selection and get through and get selected at the end of the day. The selection course was difficult. I mean, the commando selection course was difficult because I was a young bloke then, and it was the hardest thing I'd done in my life to that point. And there were other hard things that commandos put you through in terms of training and exercise and operations. And the SAS was a continuation of that effectively. So it's the longest selection course at the time. Now I think the period for selection is the same, but back then it was 10 days as opposed to 21 days for the SAS selection course. And I was successful in that, me and about, I think it was about 18 other guys. And then we went through our Rio Cycle. And the Rio Cycle is basically a reinforcement cycle, as where after you finish selection, you continue to do a whole bunch of courses that qualify you as an SAS operator and get the SAS qualification, but also gives you your special skill sets to work within a patrol and be deployable with the qualifications that you require as a minimum standard. So that 18 months was over, or just about over, and we had the chance to go on Christmas leave, and I went on Christmas leave, and I was on Christmas leave, and they rang us up and said, look, you got to come back early, we're about to deploy. And this is about the time they switched focus from Afghanistan to Iraq. And when I came back from overseas holiday, we basically did our build up to go overseas to Iraq. So very lucky, very fortunate to come straight up on a Rio Cycle and go straight away to the Iraq War, 2003. And we were part of the one squadron who, it's now well documented in a number of books, one squadron who were part of the first thrust into Iraq when war was kicked off and when war was declared. A lot of what we did in the desert, in the Western Desert of Iraq, is written about in a number of books, so you can look into that if you like. But it was, at that point in time, the greatest thing I could ever imagine doing, and I was with the people that I really wanted to be like and be with and be mentored by and be surrounded by. So even though it was a war, it was such a great experience for me, and I always look back on that period as an absolute highlight. But the thing about being in the SAS is there's always highlights. You know, there's always something to look forward to. There's always something to do. And at that point in time, because of 9/11, there were operations all over the world all the time, and they weren't necessarily 6-month or 3-month deployments. Some of them were really short jobs. No one knew you were there in the first place, or no one knew you were ever going there. But even after the fact, but it was all very exciting and always something to look forward to and to train for and to keep pushing yourself to be better at. Very lucky to be deployed to a number of different places. Spent a bit of time again back in East Timor, Timor-Leste it was called by that stage. A few countries in the Middle East, spent a bit of time in Afghanistan, went back to Iraq for a little bit, and it was just a great period. And it was such a good environment that you were continually pushing, continually training, and continually had someone to chase in terms of trying to make yourself a better soldier. And it got to the point for me where I actually suffered a bit of burnout. So I suffered chronic fatigue, and this is where I first got an inclination of what mental illness was and what it was that people had to navigate when they were affected by mental illness, because effectively I was not able to operate at the level, or not able to operate at all, because chronic fatigue basically put me in bed for 23 hours a day for a long, long period of time, you know, up to 6 months at that point. And I was very fortunate to have my girlfriend at that stage, my wife now, and the support of the unit and my hierarchy and that sort of thing. So, but it's just an indicator of how hard we push. Even though we are fit and even though we're young and we're at the top of our game, it's the operational tempo and the training tempo there was so high, and the standards were so high that we just continue, and I continued to push myself to the point where I actually had to call time and take time out. I still look back on that period, that whole period when I was sick and when I was healthy, is one of the greatest periods of my life. Got towards my end of my career where I realised, okay, well, I'd said at the start that I would do 10 years, and I ended up doing 12 years in the Army, and then I was looking at the next phase of my life. So 2 years before I actually discharged from the Army, I decided that I needed to start my transition out. So leading up to that point, two of my business partners, who were both commandos, we had started to buy properties, and we're starting to trade properties because we knew wanted to set ourselves up for when it was time to leave the unit or leave the Army, that we had something to fall back on and some skills and expertise to carry on with and carry the momentum on. So we're pretty focused on outside of keeping up the skills and capabilities within the job to actually learn as much as we could about property investing and real estate. So my intent after I left the military was to actually become a builder. And one thing I knew about living in the Sunshine Coast, living in Queensland, was that a lot of the builders, they would only work if there was no surf, and I was a surfer. So I just knew that, okay, well, not that I was going to try and wig out of work all the time, but that lifestyle appealed to me, to be able to work outside, to be able to build things and effectively create art, if you wanted to look at it that way, but also live a lifestyle where I could surf and the water was warm all the time and all that sort of thing. That very much appealed to me. As I was leaving the Army, one of my mates, one of my guys who was in my patrol in the regiment, he said he wanted to start a gym, and he actually went to train at a place called Jim Jones in Utah in the US. At that point, Jim Jones was actually started by a guy named Mark Twight, and Mark Twight is effectively a pariah in fitness circles at that point. He was very much into the counter fitness culture, so his way of thinking about training and fitness was very much around building your capacity. So he was a alpinist or a mountain climber that basically they did the ascent in one day and descent in one day. So if they didn't have to sleep, they wouldn't. They'd just do it all in one day, or as quickly as they could without resting. So there was obviously that's a pretty extreme sport. So to train for an extreme sport like that, you had to think outside the box in terms of how you prepared yourself for that. And the normal gym methodologies didn't really suit that way of thinking for training. So a lot of the military community actually picked up on what Mark was trying to say, and including my business partner at the time. And he said he went over to Utah and trained with him. He believed in it so much that when he came back to Perth, he said, "Oh, look, I'm pretty interested in doing this. Would you be interested in investing some money in it?" And myself and four of the other guys said, "Yeah, we would." And that's how we started the mill gym. Now, actually, I started working at the mill purely out of, by accident, really. I'm actually not a gym junkie, although fitness was a big part of my life and training every day was a big part of my life. It was really purely to support my capacity to, one, work as an operator in the regiment, but also maintain a quality of life. And for the amount of work that we had to do in the military and the amount of experiences we had, I had found that training, and even throughout my life as an adolescent, training and being fit gave me an outlet which was healthy and gave me something else to think about rather than things that would normally bother people who don't have training in their life. And the thing about training is it also gives you confidence because you actually know that there's certain things you can do, and as a young bloke walking into a room where you can do more pull-ups and more push-ups, or you can run faster than anyone else in the room, it gives you a level of confidence. And it's really important as a young person to know that, well, confidence is a result of your capacity and your belief in yourself and your self-efficacy. And the way you build confidence is to actually build capability. And to build capability is you become fitter and stronger. The only thing that kept me in the game was this belief that we can make this happen, and this is worthy and this is worth it. And we have what it takes. We just got to find a way to do it. And even though I didn't have the capacity that I had when I was in the regiment, and especially when I first joined, I knew that I could make this work. And here we are 12 years later. We were very fortunate to make it work. But a lot of navigating that was actually being able to, when I could, train, get outside, surf, run, climb, do all those things that I loved to do as a kid and as a soldier. I even started shooting again, just to get back into all those things that I loved doing as a kid, playing guitar and all those sorts of things. Like, to me, that's what made me happy, and that's effectively what, besides having an awesome wife and a really stoic partner in her, getting diagnosed with depression, anxiety and all these sorts of things, and having chronic fatigue and having to deal with the inability to function for periods of time and not meet the requirements of a normal life, like being able to work a 9 to 5. Like there's periods there where migraines would take over and have migraines for 5 days, or I get a migraine and the migraine would put me out for 3 days and I'll be in bed the whole time and have to be in a dark room. Even though, and I haven't seen as much as a lot of guys, like I got out very early in the piece, whereas people who continue to serve after me have been through a lot more than me. But at the same time, what you go through, especially in the transition phase, is a very familiar story for a lot of guys who leave the military, a lot of guys and girls who leave the military and transition to the civilian space. And it's quite an adjustment to go from the military environment where you have a high level of certainty around what your future has and what your future holds for you. And you are subject to some potentially traumatic situations, experiences, and because that is the nature of what we do and what we prepare for. And at the time, and most of the time, you because it's so busy, you just take it in your stride and you get on with it, and you have to move so fast that you don't spend too much time thinking about things. And it's only when you have time and you start to think about transitioning and you're going into an uncertain arena like the civilian arena after spending 12 years in the military, you start to realise that you don't know everything and you can't foresee everything, and you might be dealing with the trauma of service, or for some guys it's experiences which they still haven't dealt with, or for whatever it is, as human beings, because we are human beings at the end of the day, there's still things that we have to deal with, and before we go to the next stage of our life, we're still dealing with, and then dealing with the next stages of our life. So, but that didn't make it any easier. Like I had a purpose, I still had a purpose, but I was still trying to find my way outside the military and trying to cast off a lot of the baggage that I carried from the military, and a lot of the assumptions that I had about civilian life, and a lot of assumptions that I had about people's perception of me and my wife's perception of me, and my perception of my life going forward. And so there's a lot of uncertainty at that point in time. And also knowing that I had a decreased level of capability and capacity, basically antagonised by suffering from depression and suffering from anxiety and all those sorts of things post-military, and getting a diagnosis of PTSD. But I also knew that those things that got me into the regiment, those things that got me into the SAS, those things that got me into university or whatever it was, those things that got me there were me. It was effectively my ability to rationalise, my ability to plan, my ability to see things in a way, or break down problems in a way that enabled me to get on with it and pass it, or get selected, or win, or whatever it was. At that point, it made it imperative to me that it was on me. I had to make it work. We have to make it succeed. And if I pushed the responsibility to someone else, I wasn't taking control of the situation. I wasn't able to deal with it. So that's in the business sense, but that also made sense for me in terms of dealing with mental illness and dealing with depression, anxiety, and all those sorts of things. And I knew that those were a process as well. And after getting counselling and seeing certain people, seeing psychologists and psychiatrists and going through the system with the military, you start to realise that there's studies done on this. I'm not the only one who's gone through this, and not the only one who will ever go through this. And it's been a well-trodden path, not a comfortable path by any stretch, but definitely a well-trodden path where there were processes, there were systems that we can go through, or at least try, see if they don't work, try it again to see came to the right conclusion about it, and then switch target or switch methodologies or something like that. But we had to keep trying. We just had to keep going. You have to keep doing it. But I think the clearest path for me was to do things that I enjoyed. And like going back to shooting and sticking with surfing and doing jiu-jitsu and all those things that I'd find myself as when I was in that unit, for want of a better word, as a warrior or something like that, or a protector. And maintaining those skills is what spoke to me as a kid, it's what spoke to me as an adult in the military, and it also speaks to me today, is that is the way I think I am postured, that's the way I think I am. So I continued training those skills, and if I couldn't get out there, if I was too tired or injured or whatever it was to wrestle or to do whatever it was, I could at least go paddle out in the water. I could actually sit in the water and not catch any waves. When it was time to come back in, I just catch some whitewash and come back in. So just the fact that I was out there was better than sitting and stewing my juices at home. and worrying about things which weren't worth worrying about. And then being out there in the elements is something that you have to be on your game. You have to be mindful, because you're at the whim of nature, Mother Nature. You know, you're subject to the power of the ocean. That gives you something else to think about and keeps you present. Gives you, if you catch a wave, you know, you're actually thinking. You're not thinking. You're just doing, because you're reacting to what the wave's doing or giving you or not giving you. And that's a pretty powerful experience for a lot of people, to get outside your own head and realise that the world is much bigger than you. That your problems, they are significant to you, but they're not really significant. It's a hard thing to say, and it's a hard thing to listen to for some people. But that's a realisation I came to fairly early in the piece, is realise that, well, one, there's a lot of people going through what I'm going through. A lot of people got through it, and to me, you had to make a choice. You know, you could either follow the tried and tested methods to navigate your way out of it, and don't stop, keep persevering, because that's what, you know, effectively selects. That's what you get selected for in selection, is you keep going. You don't withdraw. You don't count yourself out. You just give yourself no other choice than just to keep going and find a way, because, like I said, it's a well-worn path. There is a way. You just got to find the way that works for you. We are designed to be in the sunlight amongst nature. And I think that everyone, if they really thought about it, if they were to spend any length of time in the peace and quiet of nature, they would start to become much more calmer and start to be able to rationalise their life. As long as they tuned into what was going on around them, and how big this world is, and how little we are, then you start to realise that, okay, you know, maybe it isn't as bad as I thought it was. You know, maybe there's another way to think about this, or there's another way to talk or do. Another thing to do about this, and there always is. And surfing's fun. You know, when you're catching a wave, it's fun. You know, it's probably the most fun thing I've done, that you can do on a regular basis. That is, besides like jumping out of a plane or something like that. But it never gets boring, surfing, because there's so much variation, so much variety from a day-to-day aspect. Even if you're surfing the same break, no two waves are the same, and you have to be reading the conditions all the time. You have to make sure you're in the right spot. You have to, you know, don't get lazy, put the extra 2 strokes in when you're paddling for a wave, otherwise you get left behind. All those sorts of things you got to think about. And then the challenge of actually saying, okay, this is the wave I want to be really good at. So if you focus on that one break alone, that's enough to fill your days with heaps of ways to think about actually becoming the guy at this break, or the person at this break who's got this break down pat. Just all these sorts of things. You find a way to get yourself out there and challenge yourself, and it never ends. And then you start to realise that your problems aren't as bad as for me, my problems aren't as bad as I thought they were. I'm still conscious. I've still got 2 arms, 2 legs, my hands and feet are still working, my brain's still working. I've got an awesome wife and an awesome family, I've got awesome business partners. And that's through that's you being you. The authentic you is a person that people see and want to be with and trust to be your business partner. Well, that says something. So you've got to find those things that say, well, this makes you worthy. This is worth your time. This is worth driving yourself forward for. And what it says is, as often as you can, get outside. And for me, it's surf.
Nick's story is a message of hope for all of us. No matter how big your problems may seem to be, or no matter how big that obstacle is, there is always a way through, and surfing might just be the one thing that you've been missing. If you'd like to learn more about Nick and the Mill Gym, you can check them out on Instagram and at themillgym.com. And if this video has inspired you to want to learn how to surf, you can find a whole range of surfing tutorials on my playlist at The Surfer's Journey. And you can also follow us on Instagram.